Okay. Thank you, sir. Good job it wasn't half an hour like last week. Last week, I pressed go live on the streaming software, but didn't press it on YouTube because my old streaming software, you press it on the software and it pushes it to YouTube. So I was sat here for 30 minutes talking to myself. At least it wasn't that long this time. But yeah, thanks for the heads up. Appreciate it. So I was just welcoming chat. And I was just talking about how I really enjoyed last week's show. And then began the week trying to figure out what this week's was going to be about. And then got a little bit of inspiration like midweek. And then the project just ballooned as it does. You know, if I've got a week, then I'll bloody use the week. And it ends up being too big because you end up collecting tons of content. And then you have to shape it, and then you have to edit the content. I just end up getting too much. So it kind of consumed me the latter part of the week as I realized the deadline was coming for 8 p.m. on the Sunday. And I was still like, oh man, I'm going to have to work a little bit harder and quicker on this. But enjoying it so far. So, I guess, when you're creating things, I guess at the beginning you end up throwing a lot at it, and then the more experience you get, the better you get at it. You start to strip away, so your preparation becomes more efficient and cleaner, and then the execution is a lot easier because you haven't got so many moving parts, so many plates to spin, and I don't make it easy for myself, that's for sure. But I enjoy it. So yeah, welcome to the show. Thanks for popping along on a Sunday. Hope everyone's chilled and they've had a good week, whether you're high or low or just in the middle. I hope it's been a good one for you. Thanks Tony for joining, Mayor of Magaluf. Not sure whose account that is. Trevor's here, Trevor Labonte. Hi Trevor, how you doing? Good to see you back. And we have Margie, of course, and Conscious Observer, who gave me the heads up on the sound first. Thank you, sir. And now I've got to scroll through a load of you're muted. Okay, good. We got it. Yeah, we can hear now. Thanks, Trevor. Appreciate that. It was. Yeah. See if this works. How does that go? Oh no, I thought it would highlight on. Okay. So. Yeah. Gonna begin, and I will at the end go back to the chat. So if there's any questions that come up or contributions or statements or anything that comes in the show, I'll go back at the end and try and work my way through it. So I guess this lounge stream exists for a specific reason. That's what I'm calling it, the lounge stream. It's to notice things slowly and not to react to them maybe as quick, to maybe not be quick to take a side either, although it's inevitable that we will lean one way or another. We just want to try and see events a little bit more clearly, with a little less passion, maybe. Because tonight I want to look at speech and what happens when it quietly narrows. Not because of one law as such, not because of one person, but because of something in the atmosphere. This isn't news, it's not outrage, it's not mobilization. I've done that before, and it's certainly not debate. I'm not a fan of debate. That's why Socrates was put to death. It was a debate. I debate my friends, I destroy my enemies. Why would I want to debate my enemies? This place is a listening room, a thinking room, a drinking room, although not for me in dry January, which is actually going quite well. The only thing I miss is going to the pub. So I've been watching the football at home. I usually only go to the pub to watch the football. It gives me a reason to go out, So I'm just enjoying the hibernation period and see how far that goes, the whole dry 2026. And you don't need to agree with anything that's said here. You don't need to perform a position. You can sit with questions that don't need to be resolved. See, that's the deal. And here's the shape of tonight. Slow media, the antithesis of TikTok culture. Long arcs, not headlines. Speech is something fragile. Culture, power, perception. This room is a counter space, a deliberate act of defiance against a world optimized for reaction. And the narrowing of speech doesn't begin with bans. It begins with exhaustion, with constant performance of having the right take immediately on everything. So let the room settle. Let's take a breath, because we've got the time. Václav Havel once wrote about living in truth. And Václav Havel was a Czech playwright who became one of the 20th century's most important dissidents. When Soviet tanks crushed the Prague Spring in 1968, he refused to stay silent and paid for it. Banned from publishing, fired from theatres, he worked as a brewery labourer while his plays were performed in 300 productions worldwide. In 1977, he founded Charter 77, demanding the communist regime respect human rights. The secret police built a sentry box outside his cottage to watch him. He was arrested repeatedly, spending nearly 5 years in prison, where he wrote philosophical letters to his wife that became foundational texts on living authentically under oppression. His 1978 essay, The Power of the Powerless, argued that totalitarian systems survive not through force alone, but through ordinary people's small daily compromises, and that refusing to live within the lie is the first act of resistance. And when offered exile to New York, he refused, unless other political prisoners were also freed. By 1989, tens of thousands signed his petition for democracy. Weeks later, the regime collapsed and Havel became president. He's the man who wrote that the first corruption of language happens in the private mind. Before you police what others say, you police what you let yourself think. That's the implicit contract here, not agreement, just a willingness to look at what's actually still there. So let that sit. Here's what people feel already. They're editing themselves more than they used to. Not dramatically, not once, just more. The editing happens in layers. First word choice, then topic choice, then whether to speak at all. And then the strange part, whether to even finish the thought internally. You run the conversation in your head first, like you're simulating a moderation algorithm. You become your own content filter before the words even leave your mouth, before they've even fully formed in your mind. tone policing feels ambient now, not enforced by any one person, just there, like the weather, like gravity, like humidity. You can't point to who's doing it, but everyone feels it. David Foster Wallace gave a commencement speech once. He asked a room full of people, "What is water?"
If anybody feels like perspiring, I'd invite you to go ahead, because I'm sure going to. In fact, I'm going to get a hanky right here. Greetings, thanks, and congratulations to Kenyon's graduating class of 2005. There are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" This is a standard requirement of U.S. commencement speeches, the deployment of didactic little parable-ish stories. The story thing turns out to be one of the better, less bullshitty conventions of the genre. But if you're worried that I plan to present myself here as the wise older fish explaining what water is to you younger fish, please don't be. I am not.
So what if the narrowing of speech is the water? What if we're swimming in it and most people don't even notice that it's there? Then there's something else, something nobody really talks about. The relief people feel when someone else says it first. You've probably felt that. The quiet exhale when someone names the thing you were thinking but didn't want to be the first to say it. Thank God someone said it. The relief is diagnostic. It relieves the pressure. If you've relieved that someone else took the risk, it means you felt the risk. You calculated it. You decided silence was safer. And that calculation happened so fast, you probably didn't even notice it. And I know this from my own experience, in which I didn't have the filter to let me weigh up the risk well enough to control the thought and stop what came out of my mouth. It caused me a lot of problems. So much so that, I had to go and fight a big legal case for defamation, which I won. But it's that point where you have the thought and whether you can stop the speech. Because there's another layer most people don't really examine, and that's the pleasure in the internal edit. The dopamine hit of belonging. The relief of righteous alignment. The warm feeling of being on the right side. Because you say the wrong thing and you're expelled from the group. And due to our social nature, nobody wants to be outside of the group because that's where the danger lies. The church knew this best with the power of excommunication. When Christendom was all-powerful in Europe, if a king stepped out of line, i.e. he went against the canon of the church, he would be excommunicated. He would be cast out. And this could have an enormous effect on a country, on a king. It happened in England in 1213. John was excommunicated by the Pope and he had to go begging for forgiveness to be allowed back into the fold. Because sometimes silence isn't just safer, it's rewarded. You get social credit for not saying the uncomfortable thing, for reading the room correctly, for being emotionally intelligent enough to know what's off limits and know where that third rail is. But sometimes we touch the third rail just for fun, to make us feel alive. And this is what virtue signaling is really about. It's saying what's accepted within the consensus, because the reward is social status. The people in power who are controlling the speech dish out status biscuits for the virtue signalers who have displayed loyalty in their rhetoric. Because the system doesn't just punish dissent, it rewards conformity. And the rewards feel good. They feel like community, like being a good person. The virtue signal paid off. George Orwell, one of the greatest thinkers, writers, artists of the 20th century, who understood this on a meta level, that he was able to create such iconic works that they're not just books or movies, they are cultural events which have woven its way into the language, into the culture, into everything. And he wrote something once that you don't see how the first corruption of language happens in the private mind. And he was a prolific writer on this topic of censorship and free speech. Before you police what others say, you police what you let yourself think. The narrowing starts internally. You stop letting certain thoughts complete themselves. You interrupt your own sentences before they get dangerous. And after a while, you stop having those thoughts at all. That's mind control. Suppressed, silenced, dumbed down. The censorship becomes invisible because it's pre-conscious. It's being conditioned into your subconscious, which rarely runs the show. The conscious mind is just the filter of the signal. One more thing. Who can afford to speak freely? If your economic position is precarious, if you're freelance, if you're in a competitive field, if your livelihood depends on not being subject of a threat, silence becomes rational, because slander, defamation are not a personal attack. It's a commercial attack. It's to attack your ability to make a livelihood, to earn a living, because the object of the character assassination is to stop other people working with you. That's the goal, to remove your ability to create income. And that's why if you bring an action for defamation, it's not a criminal act, it's a civil act, which is about money. And that's why the damages for defamation can be so big, because defamation can be so damaging. I found this out at my own expense. And I was blacklisted from the film industry, a place where I'd worked for 15 years. The doors were slammed shut because you either accept the orthodox narrative or you become a social pariah. You can't risk the wrong comment in the wrong WhatsApp group. We've all been there. One drink away from being Mighty Mel. Because you can't afford the screenshot. You can't afford to have your name next to a position that someone else could weaponize against you. Because the narrowing doesn't hit everyone equally. The tenured professor who doesn't have to worry about losing his job can say things the adjunct can't. The independently wealthy can say things the debt-laden can't. And this is why they want us laden with debt. Freedom of speech has always had a class dimension, because defamation If you go through the courts, through the lawyers, costs tens of thousands. I was able to represent myself. But things are getting sharper. And here's the thing. You might be sitting there thinking, I don't feel this. I say what I want. Maybe you do. Maybe you're one of the lucky ones. Or maybe you've just internalized the boundaries so completely that you don't feel them as boundaries anymore. You just feel them as common sense, as things we don't say, as basic decency. The question is, how do you know the difference? How do you know if you're being decent or you're being compliant? The question is where this episode, I guess, really begins. So where I got the idea for this episode from was I was doing my walk, and I take a little notepad with me, hoping to get inspiration when I'm walking. And it came to me about Keir Starmer, as if it's not obvious. Keir Starmer and the whole public exchange with Elon Musk. And that for me has been an incredible story to watch. Now, I mentioned earlier that I bit off more than I could chew preparing for this, and I was meant to get a load of footage for between those two, but I just run out of time. And I've been tracking Musk and Starmer's struggle since Musk decided to use his platform, his status, his wealth to support the struggle of the English against the grooming gangs, which is an enormous crime against humanity, against our people, that's being suppressed, lied about, and covered up by our own people, including Keir Starmer. And the fact that Musk was able to use his platform to bring the truth of these crimes to public light was incredibly damaging to Starmer. And that's been ongoing, I guess, for the last 12 months. And it's developing into, different points of attack on the chessboard of free speech and the pushback against this totalitarian, despotic regime that we find ourselves under in the UK and the EU. I guess the UK is even more ideological than the EU. So to have this pushback and to see this argument play out, and then Starmer using all of the levers of state power to slowly but surely reduce the way that we can express ourselves in the United Kingdom, and more people go into prison. I thought that's the thing I want to talk about. And specifically, where it's been going over the last few weeks. This had to be a bit funny for us with Starmer and the whole thing with Grok, right? So, as anyone's been following it, they know that Grok and all of the other AIs, you could put in a prompt, in a command to, when someone would come up in the feed, you can say, Grok, put them in a bikini. And it became like this little bit of a viral trend. And it must have pissed Starmer off so much that he's rushed a law through, a primary legislation, to close Grok down. Shut it down. And as usual, these despicable people are using child safety as the way to silence our speech. And this is the scorecard. I'll just read this. The UK government has the absolute audacity to lecture Elon Musk about morality. Keir Starmer calls Grok disgraceful and pretends to hold the moral high ground. Let's check the scorecard. Covered up industrial-scale grooming gangs for decades, allowed thousands of British children to be exploited in Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford and beyond, while police and councils looked the other way to avoid racism accusations. Victims who fought back in self-defense got longer prison sentences than the criminals who attacked them. Arrested the victims themselves rather than the grooming gangs committing the actual crimes. Arrested citizens for memes and social media posts. Over 12,000 charged for hate speech in a year, while real violent crime syndicates rocketed. Jailed people for speaking out against mass migration policies that fueled these failures, turned entire towns into no-go zones where women and girls aren't safe, created a blatant two-tier justice system, light touch for certain offenders, iron fist for native Brits who complain. Insulting to victims. So this guy is all about silencing dissent. He is a tyrant in the most obvious definition. Let's listen to him here, losing control for a moment. So he says Ofcom, and Ofcom are just the official censors of the government. Now, this is playing out for the public, and everyone can see it happen, and the government keeps doubling down. It's not like they're saying, okay, we'll concede a little bit of ground here. No, they're going from bad to worse, because they had complete control. They had complete control of the narrative. Nothing escaped the lips of the people without being mercilessly crushed. And now there is a platform where at least some dissent is possible. Now, this exchange between Musk and Starmer isn't friendly. If Starmer could completely and utterly crush Musk, he absolutely would. Because he framed platforms like X as dangerous, not illegal, uncontrollable, outside of the possession of this particular faction of power. The implication was clear. Unmediated communication is inherently risky. Social media as a teenager who needs supervision. All of the other social media platforms are well pressed down. Zuckerberg has a little bit of, a little bit more freedom recently, but he's still the same guy. And around the same time, the UK government have also announced plans for WhatsApp screening or WhatsApp scanning, in which the government will now scan your messages before they're encrypted. So what's the point of the encryption? Now they really want to snoop on you. Potentially that's the end of WhatsApp, because people will leave in droves. But messages would be scanned to check for illegal content. Now, private speech, the kind you assume is just between you and someone else, becomes a security surface, pre-crime data. And what was a private conversation now has a third party in the conversation, the snooping state into your private conversations. And this isn't about one platform. It's not about Elon Musk or Keir Starmer specifically. They're just two nodes in the matrix. It's about unmediated communication being framed as inherently dangerous. That if our conversations aren't monitored, they are dangerous. And there's a clip of a film that I want to pull out, see if I've got it lined up here. It's an awesome movie. Maybe it was in the other one. Let me see if I've got it right. Yeah. So it's called The Lives of Others. It's a long clip, but I won't play it all, but I might do. We'll see how it is. It's about 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. And The Lives of Others is an absolutely tremendous movie if you haven't seen it. I went to watch it when it came out. It must be about 20 years ago now, maybe less. It was one of the few times that I went to the cinema alone. Very rarely go to the cinema alone. And it was in London, and I went to the Curzon Cinema, I remember, because it was such a powerful film that the entire cinema spontaneously stood up and clapped at the end of the movie. I've never been to a film since that the audience have reacted like that. And it's set in East Germany in the 1980s, when the Stasi had everybody under complete surveillance. It got that bad that when they interrogated people, they would rub the clothes, the t-shirts and the underpants and the cloth, and put it in a jar and put the lid on it so that they could keep the smell of the person who was being interrogated. And if he tried to escape, or when he was released he tried to escape, they would give the clothing to the dogs, and the dogs would go and hunt them out. In the film, it's about a playwright being bugged in his apartment because this playwright has dangerous ideas and he's using his art to express them. This is why even Plato said artists are dangerous to the Republic. Unfortunately, most of the artists we have now are, under the left-wing authoritarian regime. So in this scene is when the Stasi come to bug the flat.
Minuten. Frau Meinecke, ein Wort zu irgendwem und Ihre Mascha verliert morgen ihren Medizinstudienplatz.
Haben Sie das verstanden?
Ja.
Schicken Sie Frau Meinecke zur Anerkennung für Ihre Verschwiegenheit ein Geschenk.
So, yeah, this is what the Germans had to put up with after the communists took it at the end of World War II. And the Stasi were just feared by everyone, terrorized the people, because they didn't need to arrest everyone, just enough to teach the lesson. The surveillance didn't ban speech. It changed what got said. Now, they don't need to bug our apartments anymore because we got the phones, right? The phones do the job now, right? So in the movie, because he starts to suspect he's being surveilled, he starts to censor his own work. Not because anyone tells him to, because he knows someone is listening. And once you know someone is listening, you write differently, you think differently, you act differently. The watched person becomes the watcher, because the state knows that it can't enforce everyone everywhere, but it can instill fear, which spreads like a virus. So why now? What's changed in the West that made governments feel they could move this fast to a technological Stasi state? COVID. Because COVID, not as a conspiracy, as precedent. Emergency powers were normalized. The machinery for rapid, sweeping intervention was built, and more importantly, it was accepted. Lockdowns, vaccine passports, contact tracing apps, restrictions on movement, restrictions on assembly, restrictions on speech. I got arrested myself during COVID for breaching the COVID rules. And most of it had public support. The public were frothing at the mouth for more hardcore rules. Govern me harder, daddy. Now, I'm just noting here that the architecture was built during COVID. In fact, that could have been the real reason behind it, because a precedent was set, especially in the psyche of the people, of the world. Emergency measures became normal measures. The temporary infrastructure doesn't get dismantled, it just gets repurposed for its original purpose. The architecture was there, it just needed a new use case. And the new use case is speech, because speech is the most dangerous thing to tyrannical, authoritarian governments, because ideas are dangerous to people like Starmer. And every time that power feels unstable, speech becomes the problem. You don't go that far back to see the pattern. You just have to know where to look. Milton, one of the greatest free speech writer the world has ever produced, back in 1644 in England, there was a licensing system. You couldn't publish anything without approval. Pre-publication censorship. The government decided what ideas were allowed to exist. And Milton wrote a famous book called Areopagitica. His argument wasn't abstract. It was practical, urgent, and he said if you kill ideas before they're born, you murder truth in the cradle. What about that for a quote? You don't just suppress bad ideas, you suppress the possibility of discovering what's true. Because truth doesn't arrive fully formed. It emerges through contest, through argument, through the collision of partial perspectives. If you pre-filter everything, you don't get the truth. You get the approved narrative. And control of the narrative is what they obsess over. After John Milton, Thomas Jefferson, one of the greatest presidents in American history, and was one of the intellectual heavyweights behind the First Amendment and the freedom of the press. He said, "Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter." Now, he's not talking about the New York Times or the Sun or the Daily Mail. He's talking about the free press, the press as a watchdog on government power, on the corruption in government, which is one of the reasons why the press was targeted for takeover, because it shapes opinions, it controls the narrative. He called prior restraint, that is, restraining ideas before they've even been born, tyranny over the mind. Not tyranny over the body, but tyranny over the mind. Because if you can control what people say, you can control what they think. And if you can control what they think, you control the world. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Milton and Jefferson weren't saints. They, had their own shortcomings, as we all do. But they were people who were noticing patterns. And I think that's a really, really important skill to have in this modern world, the ability to notice patterns, pattern recognition. And pattern recognition in and of itself can get you in an awful lot of trouble. And the part that nobody likes to talk about is that revolutionaries who fought censorship often became censors themselves. And I don't really know where I truly sit on it myself. I think maybe some things need censorship. Some small things in extreme situations and extreme circumstances. I haven't fully thought it through what that would be, but I can see some of the argument for it. But is that the slippery slope? Is that the thin end of the wedge? Because once you can get your foot in the door, where does that lead? Some of the people who allegedly fought for the people, Robespierre, who was the demented maniac in the French Revolution, who was obsessed with violence and chopping people's heads off. And you have this lunatic, Lenin, who was meant to champion the people, was then ended up responsible for millions of people's deaths. Followed by this guy, the man of steel, Joseph Stalin. Another 20 million people died under his communist dictatorship. Then we got old Mao, Chairman Mao. Another mass murderer in the name of the People's Republic of Communism. And then where does this guy fit into this pantheon of communist leaders? Because you can be sure that's what his ideology is, even though he looks a little more polished than those guys before him with a nice business suit. The pattern repeats because power, any power, needs narrative coherence. Competing stories aren't just annoying, they're destabilizing. And once you're in charge, destabilization feels like a threat. And once you believe your vision is righteous, dissent feels like sabotage. These people are so indoctrinated in the ideology, they believe they're the heroes of the story. The villain always thinks he's the hero of the story. It's all about perspective. So the pattern isn't bad people do censorship. The pattern is power needs coherence, and coherence requires control. The question is never, will people try to control speech? The question is, what mechanisms exist to resist that control? And those mechanisms, legal, cultural, technological, are weakening. Let's be specific about something. Socialism or communism, depending on how you want to frame it, doesn't default to tyranny because of bad people. It defaults to tyranny because it must control the narrative to stay coherent. The entire system rests on a single causal story. Collective ownership solves exploitation. The workers own the means of production, inequality disappears, justice prevails. And as we know, that story is merely to rise the peasants against the capitalist owners, which is very attractive if you're a peasant, right? And this is how they're able to mobilize these revolutions. But that story fractures if people start questioning whether it's actually working, because the system then loses its legitimacy. So dissent isn't just wrong, it's structurally dangerous, which means it must be managed. And here's the thing, this isn't unique to socialism. All utopian projects have this fragility. All totalizing visions require narrative control. Fascism needs it. Theocracy needs it. Any system that claims to have the complete answer to the human condition needs everyone to agree on what that problem is and what the answer looks like. What makes a socialist state different historically is the totality of the claim. They're not just making a claim, they're actually managing the economy. And they're managing meaning itself. Work, family, art, language, history, everything becomes part of the project, which means everything becomes political. And everything political becomes regulated. Orwell understood this better than almost anyone.
But even as we grasp at victory, there is a cancer, an evil tumor, growing, spreading in our midst. Shout! Shout! Shout out his name!
Nothing the party does is good. Even the war itself isn't good. The party wants you to believe we are at war, so as to channel your emotions away from their rightful target. The party would never listen. He is a foolish, great the real rulers of the state face with manipulators who, because they are not take the real power without great the party doesn't say it says itself. We are all of the busy. We are the slaves. We are being made into obedient, stupid slaves of the power. Think your eyes. See the evil that is happening. Its own citizens. It is a party that the Eurasians who
Your 2 minutes of hate, because he knew that language shapes thought. Thought shapes reality. Control the language and you control the reality. Newspeak wasn't just about banning words. It was about making certain thoughts unthinkable. If you don't have the word for freedom, you can't think coherently about being unfree. The narrowing of language is the narrowing of consciousness. And this is where I diverge from Orwell. Because he showed the danger. He was brilliant at diagnosis. But I'm interested in where agency still lives, because narrative control doesn't work forever. Eventually it fails.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Reporting tonight from Berlin.
From the Berlin Wall specifically, take a look at them. They've been there since last night. They are here in the thousands. They are here in the tens of thousands. Occasionally they shout, Die Mauer muss weg, the wall must go. Thousands and thousands of West Germans come to make the point that the wall has suddenly become irrelevant. Something, as you can see, almost to party on. How do you measure such an astonishing moment in history? The East German government said tonight they were going to make more openings in the wall, at least a dozen more. Put bulldozers right through the wall so that more people could cross to the west.
Now, I went to East Germany when I was a kid with my mum. I spoke about it in a previous podcast with my mum. And, you know, it was very much like what we saw in the lives of others. Now, the wall and communism in East Germany came down at lightning speed. It just happened overnight. All of a sudden, it was gone and it collapsed. And this is, you know, one of the interesting things about The Lives of Others, the film, is that this totalitarian state that had control of all aspects looked like it would never, ever, ever be defeated because it was so strong and so powerful, was gone in an instant. And the guy who was running the secret police was then a postman, or he was a taxi driver. And it demonstrates quite clearly is that this is the reason why they have to have narrative control at all times, because the moment the crack appears in the wall, they can't stop it. They can't stop the complete collapse of the narrative. And then reality reasserts itself. Economic collapse reveals the gap between propaganda and lived experience. Generational fatigue sets in and the people get tired of pretending. And eventually someone stops pretending, and someone else, and then someone else, and then it cascades and they can't stop it any longer. The Soviet Union didn't collapse because of a military defeat. It collapsed because people stopped believing the lie. Solzhenitsyn wrote about this. Live not by lies. One person deciding to stop participating in the lie, then another, then another. The system doesn't need everyone to be a true believer. It just needs compliance. But compliance is fragile because it requires constant maintenance, constant suppression. And this guy who wrote Gulag Archipelago was sent to the gulags in communist Russia and lived to tell the tale and wrote one of the greatest books of all time. But no one talked about his second book much, 200 Years of Living Alone. And here's the tragedy that most people miss. The people enforcing narrative control often believe they're protecting something good. They're the cartoon villains. But they are true believers. And what they think is the truth is actually just the lie propagated through ideology. They think if we allow this speech, people will be harmed. Vulnerable groups will be attacked. The project will be undermined. The new Labour project will be undermined. And from inside that frame, censorship feels like care. That's what makes it so hard to resist. The oppressor believes in their own righteousness. They're not doing evil. They're doing good. They're protecting people. And there's another layer here. The left had a near monopoly on cultural production for decades. Music, film, universities, publishing. You simply couldn't get in these places if they knew your political affiliations were to the right of Marx. Right? And if they did discover your political leanings, or if you had a Damascene awakening and started to reject the lie, then you would be kicked out. You would literally be kicked out of those spheres of influence, which means dissent from the consensus felt like a reaction. It felt like you were on the wrong side of history. Now that's flipping. Not completely, not everywhere, but the monopoly is breaking. And what does that reveal? Maybe it reveals that narrative dominance, whoever holds it, creates the same pressure. The problem isn't which side controls culture. The problem is that culture can be controlled. Now, let's talk about the modern form. The 21st century vision. Platforms are framed as dangerous, safety, harm, misinformation. Those become moral wrappers. And here's the key. Once harm is the metric, everything becomes pre-justifiable. Because harm is subjective. Harm is expandable. Harm can be emotional, psychological, potential, systemic. You don't need to prove harm happens. You just need to argue harm could happen. And once that's the standard, enforcement moves upstream. The shift happens quickly. You stop policing acts. You start policing expression. From law to prophecy. Pre-crime for ideas. It's not you broke the law, it's your speech could lead to harm. And if that's the standard, enforcement moves to potential, to prediction, which means it moves to interpretation. Who decides what leads to harm? Who decides what counts as harm? Think about the questions that now matter. Can you say it? Can you be seen saying it? Can you be found to have said it later? Can you survive having said it? And can you remember saying it after it becomes unsayable? Can you afford the consequences if someone decides to make an example of you? And here's the newest layer. Can you remember saying it once it becomes banned? What if they retrospectively ban it? Because the goalposts move then, right? And you don't even know. And that's the way YouTube would censor people. They wouldn't even tell you what they were censoring you for. They want you guessing. They don't want you to know. They want you to second guess every step and every move that you make so that you just self-censor yourself. They don't need to police you. You're doing it yourself. The punishment isn't just for the act. It's illuminating. It's for everyone else watching. The message is, don't you dare or you're next. And there's another shift happening that's even quieter. You can't say that becomes, you can say, but we'll make sure no one hears it. Shadow banning, algorithmic suppression. Deplatforming without announcement. The speech still exists. Technically, it's just invisible. And if it's invisible, did it even happen? If a tree falls in a forest and the algorithm ensure no one sees the video, does it even make a sound? Solzhenitsyn wrote something about this. How the lie doesn't need to convince you. It just needs to become the pillar that you're too tired to kick. They just grind you down and demoralize you. The lie becomes structural and it holds up the building. And everyone inside the building depends on it staying up. So even people who know it's a lie participate in maintaining it. So Grok, as we discussed, had been putting bikinis on people. And this has outraged the powerful. Because They don't want to be embarrassed. These are the powerful people running the show. We're just the peasants, man. Who do you think you are, making fun of me? I'll show you. Because harm has potential. And because it's harmful, he wants to shut it down. The response was, platforms are now liable for what users could do with tools. Not what they did, but what they could. That's the precedent being set. Liability moves from the actor to the tool provider. Is the gun guilty of murder or the guy pulling the trigger? From the person to the platform, because they know if they can control the platform, they can control the person, which means platforms have to preemptively constrain what's possible, which is why we're seeing this big push at the moment for people to use their ID to sign in to these platforms, because one of the ways in which people can express dissent safely is through sock accounts. This anonymous accounts. People criticize it, but if it was public, it could ruin their lives. And he gets an opportunity to express his dissent. This is why they're going after WhatsApp, because WhatsApp actually is private. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing client-side scanning, right? It is encrypted. And client-side scanning means they check your messages before they're sent. And this is all being shaped around the Online Safety Act 2023 in the UK. This is a totalitarian piece of legislation. This is what they're using to bring in these draconian censorship laws. I'm not sure how far it will go, because there's plenty of pushback against this. And he's even on the retreat with this whole digital ID, because now he's had to concede that it won't be mandatory. And the whole point of it was mandatory, because who's going to voluntarily take it up? So even though they look all powerful, we know that there are many, many chinks in the armor that we look to exploit all the time. Now, the Online Safety Act is where this idea of harmful is being put into legislation. It's primary legislation. And it's only the way they're able to do it is because they have this big majority, right? They can push in anything they want because of parliamentary sovereignty. Now, the phrase that's in there, people should notice, is legal but harmful. Now, that's the Overton shift back in that direction, back in the left's direction. From illegal content to content that makes people uncomfortable. And who decides what's harmful? Keir Starmer? Are we going to let this guy decide what's harmful? No, it's actually his goons, Ofcom, the regulator. And they answer to the government. He gives them the orders and they go and execute them where they need to. So the government decides indirectly what's harmful, and the platforms are liable for hosting it, which means the platforms will over-moderate in order to protect themselves from government censorship, from government sanctions. Because the risk of under-moderating is too high for them to engage in. Better to remove 1,000 borderline posts than to miss one that gets you fined. Arrest numbers. Let's see if I can get some of these up. I think I might have. Let's have a look. They're here somewhere. That's not it. Yeah. UK arrests for online speech have been climbing. Now, I did have them here. I'm going to see if I can find them. I've got this. I've got it right. Hey. So I'm trying to run the stream through this bad boy, but it's a bit of a challenge, shall we say. So UK arrests for online speech have been climbing, and look at this. This is compared to other countries. Now, I don't know how true this is. It's being reported in the press, and the press aren't going to report against themselves, right? So there's definitely some element of truth to it. Now, even if it was half what it is, it's still ridiculously high, right? And this is arrests for online social media posts. In the England, it's 12,000. Belarus, that known country for freedom of expression, is in second place with just 6,000. Germany, of course, Germany, but still only in third place. China is trailing dismally in fourth, and then all of the other countries fall in behind, which is incredible. Incredible that's what's happened to the UK. Now, in the UK itself, these are arrests for offensive, false, or so-called menacing messages online have grown exponentially up until last year or 2023, where they said there's a little bit of a dip. Said it's in decline, but it's still 12,000, right? It's not 5,000, is it, right? It's still 12,000. Now, people get arrested not for threats, because those are already illegal, right? But for posts deemed offensive or grossly offensive. That's the legal language, grossly offensive, which is subjective, which is interpretive, which is pretty chilling, because you don't know where the line is until you cross it. And they move the line all the time. And they don't want you to know where the line is. They want you controlled. And this is not just the UK. This is happening across the EU with the Digital Service Act, which runs parallel to the Online Safety Act. Same architecture, slightly different implementation. Because this isn't just one country going rogue. This is a pattern, and the pattern is speech. Speech being recategorized as a public safety issue. Not because of new threats, but because interpretation of old threats. And here's the question nobody asks out aloud. Where's the counter pressure? Where's this being resisted? I mean, there's the online right, of course, right? But in Parliament, we've maybe got one MP, Rupert Lowe. Even Farage, who's meant to be a populist, who's full of shit, he's not speaking out about it. He's not pushing against it. Now, I'm not saying that's a balance the argument for its own sake. I'm saying it because the tension exists. Tech companies push back sometimes, but only if it affects their business model. Courts rule against overreach occasionally. They ruled in my favor specifically. But you need the resources or the skills or the experience to be able to do it. Civil liberties groups raise alarms, but they're usually left-wing, right? So they're within the power structure. They complicitly go along with the suppression of speech. Journalists sometimes cover it, but, are there any journalists left that are worth the salt? But the direction of travel is clear. Once precedent exists, it doesn't need new arguments, just new software. Once the infrastructure is built, it just needs to be turned on.
Change your heart. Look around you. Change your heart. It will astound you. And I need your loving like the sunshine. change your heart. Look around you. Change your heart. It will astound you. I need your loving like the sunshine. Everybody's gotta learn sometime. Everybody's gotta learn sometime. Everybody's gotta learn sometime.
And here we go back to...
The Stanford prison experiment.
Where's that coming from? Oh, there we go. So, let's talk a little bit about propaganda actually works. Because I was just told in the break there, I just looked at my WhatsApp, that this stream was censored for 2 minutes. Something to do with violation, I don't know. Perfect, wouldn't it be? Totally ironic. But let's talk a little bit about how propaganda works, because most people have the wrong model in their heads. They think propaganda is about persuasion, about actually making you believe the lie, but that's not the mechanism. Propaganda doesn't persuade, it removes alternatives. That's the key. It exhausts you, it confuses you, it collapses your trust until you surrender to the capacity of the judge. There's a model called the fire hose of falsehood. It's Russian disinformation strategy. High volume, multiple channels, rapid, continuous. No commitment to consistency. The point isn't to make you believe one thing. The point is to overwhelm you. To make you too tired to figure out what's true. Because that's where we get this information overload from. Because to find the truth, you have to sift through all this bullshit. But here's the thing, you can just invert the model. It's not just lies. It's a flood of moral imperatives. Every day, a new cause, a new outrage. A new thing that you have to have an opinion on. Immediately, publicly. Each one demanding emotional and cognitive engagement until you're just too tired to care. Propaganda makes the alternative exhausting to maintain. Not impossible, just depleting. And eventually most people just give up. Not because they believe the lie, but because maintaining disbelief is a costly endeavor. Here's the sequence, how it works in practice. You define the threat. Define the threat. Something bad is happening, misinformation, harm, hate speech. The threat feels real because some version of it is real. There are lies online. There is hateful speech. So the threat is established and everyone agrees something should be done. Make the threat category expandable. Misinformation becomes malinformation, becomes harmful legal speech. First, it's literal false information. Then it's misleading information. Then it's information that's true but lacking context. Then it's information that might lead people to wrong conclusions. The category expands quietly. Collapse categories. Make adjacent concepts feel equivalent. Far right used to mean fascists, literal fascists, or neo-Nazis. Now it includes classical liberals who think biology is real. People who question immigration policy. People who don't want to use certain pronouns. The category collapsed. And once it collapses, everyone inside gets treated the same way. Moralize the frame. If you question the category, you're enabling harm. If you defend speech you disagree with, you're platforming it. If you ask for evidence before accepting a claim, you're sea-lining. The frame becomes moral, which makes disagreement feel immoral. You centralize the voice. Look at Big Brother from 1984, not Channel 4. Only approved sources can be trusted and only approved opposition are allowed. Everyone else is suspect. Experts, credentialed institutions, official channels, these are reliable. Independent journalists, dissenting academics, outside perspectives, these are dangerous. These require preemptive enforcement. Don't wait for the harm. Prevent the conditions where harm could occur. And this is why they're using words like harm in the Online Safety Act. This is a legal term, which means that you can't wait for someone to break the law. You have to intervene before they do, which means you're enforcing based upon prediction, on interpretation, on vibes. And here's the thing about algorithmic amplification. It makes propaganda feel organic. You don't see the hand. You don't see the curator. You don't see the editorial decision. You just see what everyone else is seeing. What's trending, what's getting shared, what makes dissent feel lonely. Makes it feel dangerous and unreasonable. If everyone you see online believes X and you believe not X, the problem feels like it's you. You must be missing something. You must be on the wrong side. The algorithm doesn't need to ban your speech. It just needs to make sure nobody sees it. And if nobody sees it, you feel crazy for thinking it. Orwell was not a diagnosis. It was a prescription. He showed how it worked. The mechanics, the sequence. How we got this information, I don't know, because he must have been an insider at some level in order to be able to see how the machine works behind the scenes. But he didn't say it was inevitable. He didn't say that we couldn't defeat this edifice, because they want learned helplessness, because that's part of the mechanism. They want you to think that it's futile. Because if you believe that resistance is futile, you stop resisting, right? If you believe that the system is omnipotent, you become complicit in your own submission. And the system isn't omnipotent. It's powerful for sure, but it's not all powerful. And diagnosis without despair matters because despair is the goal. The point of showing you how it works isn't to make you give up. It's to make you recognize when it's happening. One more thing, democracies don't collapse loudly. They hollow quietly. And what does this hollowing sound like? A question not asked, a joke not told, a conversation that never starts because everyone pre-calculates the risk and decides it's just not worth it. A career path not pursued because you know what's sayable in that field. Friendships that atrophy because you can't talk about the things that actually matter. And I've lost friends over talking about things that actually matter, and family. The hollowing is invisible until it's complete. And by the time that you notice, the structure is already fragile. And there's another form of control that nobody talks about. Boredom, aesthetic disgust of the brutalist architecture and design that they impose upon us. Ugly is the virtue. Now, some ideas aren't banned. They're just made to seem vulgar, passé, cringe. You don't burn the book. You just make sure nobody wants to be seen reading it. This is softer than censorship and more potent because you don't even realize you're being controlled. You just think that you're being socially intelligent.
This is what you want, this is what you get. This is what you want, this is what you get. This is what you want, this is what you get. This is what you want, this is what you get. This is what you want, this is what you get. This is what you want, this is what you get.
So where does hope actually live? Not in external control for sure. The battle is real and those fights do matter. But that's not where freedom is won. internal sovereignty is. Now, reality transurfing has a concept. And this is a book I'm reading at the moment by Russian quantum physicist called Vadim Zeland. And it's an incredible book. He is describing the nature of reality and how we can choose the reality that we want. And it has a concept, one of the concepts, there are many. It's direct observation versus imposed narrative. You separate from what you see from what you are being told you're seeing. Most people don't do this. They accept the frame that they're given and they react inside. They see a headline, feel outrage, share it, move on. They never ask, what am I actually angry about? The event or the way it was described to me? The gap between the thing and the frame, that's where sovereignty lives. And there's a practical example. You see a headline, outrage as public figure says inflammatory thing. You feel the outrage. It's immediate. It's visceral. Stop. What are you actually angry about? Did you read what they said in full context, or did you just read the headline and fill in the rest? Because I know I mostly just read the headlines, right? Did they actually say something harmful, or did someone describe what they said as harmful? And who benefits from you being outraged right now? These aren't rhetorical questions, they're diagnostic ones. Neuro-linguistic programming calls this language hygiene, self-concept work, reclaiming your inner dialogue, because most people's inner voice isn't their own anymore. It's borrowed or inserted by the reality that they've chosen. It's stitched together from tweets, headlines, podcasts, videos like this, friend groups on WhatsApp. And because it sounds like your own voice, you assume it's yours. But if you muted the external channel for 24 hours, and I recommend doing this, switch the internet off. Switch it off completely for 24 hours. And find out which opinions evaporate because they're no longer getting fed, and which opinions are still solid inside, which are actually your own. The question is uncomfortable because it's supposed to be. And that's how you maintain cognitive autonomy under pressure. Attention is territory, the only territory you fully control, and the war is for your attention, which makes it the most contested territory there is, to keep your eyes on the screen. These people spend billions trying to figure out how to keep you looking at the screen. Every notification, every thread, every must-read take, every you need to see this, they're all competing for jurisdiction over your internal state. And most people give it away without even noticing. You've abdicated the throne inside your internal domain. The red pill, without saying it like that, is this: you can stop the bullets. Because that's the real scene in The Matrix. Not the one where he wakes up in the egg, although that's pretty profound the first time you see it. It's when you know how to stop the bullets. It's simply holding up your hand. Now, Neo doesn't leave the Matrix. He doesn't escape. He's still inside it. But he realizes the rules can be suspended from within. The system isn't fake, but its rules, including the rule that certain speech must have effects upon you, can be overridden. That's identity control. The stop bullets moment for semantic attacks. And the tension that nobody wants to name. This could sound like retreat, but it's like, just ignore the outer world, like quietism, but it's not. External battles matter, legal battles, cultural battles, physical battles, the fight for institutional restraint, but you can't fight them from a colonized internal state. So before we can evict anyone else, you have to evict the imposter that's in your inner realm. Because you can't organize with people who are slaves to their notifications. You can't build anything where people whose attention is owned by the algorithm. Internal sovereignty isn't individualism. It's the prerequisite for collective action that isn't hijacked by reactive loops. And reality transurfing calls these pendulums. Manufactured outrage loops. Collective emotional reactions that swing backwards and forwards, demanding your energy. Every time you engage, every time you reply, every time you share, you feed it, and it swings harder. Don't feed the pendulum, and the outrage will evaporate. Refuse to give your energy to the performance of reality, to the theatre, to the spectacle, because most of what you're reacting to isn't the thing itself, it's the framing, the presentation, the staging. And once you see that, you can choose not to participate. It's like when a magician reveals his trick. That illusion never, ever, ever works on you again. Which is why magicians protect their tricks with the secret society called the Magic Circle. Because that's how they make their money. They make their money selling you illusions. So to reveal the illusion is the most damaging thing a magician can do, because he loses his livelihood. And it's the same way to look at it. Once you're aware of the illusion, it can no longer work in you anymore. So how do you maintain internal sovereignty without being isolated? Because you can't do this alone. You need a community of practice. People who share the frame, who remind you when you've been pulled back into the pendulum. Not an echo chamber, a reality check network. And Marcus Aurelius called this the inner citadel, your inner fortress, a fortified place inside that no external force can touch. Because you're not disconnected, because you've built something solid. And the final piece, archetypes. Culture sells you identities, pre-packaged selves, the activist, the rebel, the conformist, the contrarian. I've played all those roles. And once you accept one, it runs you. You choose your responses based upon the archetype, or the archetype chooses for you. The activist must be outraged, the rebel must oppose, the conformist must agree. And the hero being rewired is about noticing which archetype you've been running and rewriting it. Simple as that. As narrative authorship, as autobiographical control. You're not stuck with the story the culture gave you. You can choose a different one. This isn't comfort. This isn't safety. This is maintenance. This is how you stay coherent under informational siege. This is how you protect the one jurisdiction that no platform can moderate. The space between your ears, the space between your first reaction and your next sentence. That space, that pause, is where you still have agency. So that's the shape of it. Speech narrowing, pattern recognition, propaganda mechanics, internal sovereignty. It went on a lot longer than I planned. Thank you for those who've stuck with me for, 1 hour, 45 minutes. I'm going to play one more tune in a minute, but I'll have a look at the chat. So I'll open the floor for a little short while. Don't know how much I've got left in the tank, but we'll give it a go. So what have you noticed changing in how you speak. Not what you believe about free speech in theory, not what you think should happen, but what have you noticed in yourself? Where did you last edit yourself before you even spoke? What's a question you've stopped asking? Silence is allowed. Disagreement is allowed. If someone wants to fight, I'll redirect it like an Aikido master. Not to shut them down, just to hold the space. Because this isn't a debate, it's noticing. We're here to see clarity, not to win. Thanks for listening. So I'll go back through the chat quickly. Where's it gone? Oh, there we are. So I don't know if the stream has been like shaky. I keep getting warnings from YouTube telling me that the stream's on thin ice, as it were. I don't even know if this is still going. Okay. Yeah, I can't move the chat, I'm afraid. So I was trying to scroll back the chat. Let me see what I can sort here. I've lost YouTube. Let's try this bad boy. There we go. Now I don't know what I'm meant to do with that. Okay. So I don't even know how to put this up. I'll just read them. Conscious observer says cowardice is not everyone's happy place. True. I mean, who's defining what a coward is? It's usually those who want you to go and fight the wars for them, isn't it? Right? It's a very powerful, controlling word. Because everyone is the hero of their own story. Nobody wants to be the coward. In the narrative, it's almost like the lowest status that you could possibly have, isn't it? Which makes it a powerful, motivating word. And shows the power of words, indeed, to control and shape behavior. So Mayor of Magaluf says, yeah, I deleted a few, spicy but funny. Of course they're funny. This is the problem, isn't it? Most of my jokes are spicy. And they can only be said in closed spaces, in a closed society. Yeah, I don't really, for those reasons, I don't go in WhatsApp groups anymore. I used to be the master of setting up groups, and some of them still exist. I'd leave and go, but some of them still carry on going. And now I just have one group. They're just like my friends from school, and then I just have a one-to-one with everyone else. I don't go in WhatsApp groups. Maybe there's a few school ones and shit. Margie says shrinking the word bank makes us verbally poor. Absolutely. They want to constrict the amount of words we use, and the words that we do use have to go through the consensus. Conscious Observer says UK will eventually turn off text messaging in order to ensure more control. Well, I think that would be very difficult for them, seeing as that now. I mean, when I went to Dubai, or the few times that I've been to Dubai, is that what you find is that pretty much everything is run on WhatsApp. Everything. It's mad. The police will message you on WhatsApp if you've been speeding. All of your orders are done on WhatsApp. Every business communicates on WhatsApp. So this is difficult for them to remove a tool that is now so integrated in commerce. And while it's making money, they don't ever get rid of those type of tools. So this is an attempt to control the tool, because it's one of the reasons why they're shutting pubs down, isn't it? Because they don't want us meeting, converging together in a space where ideas and uncontrolled, unmoderated chat can occur. So what did they do? Just increase the tax on the beer. Yeah, they don't ban it, right? Because they know that would be an outrage, which people would rebel against, but they just put the tax up so you can't afford it. And that's another way to control it. This is why they, censor things like this. Let's have a look. Zionism is mainly what protected ID say today. Problem is, we don't know what we don't know, who is on whose side. Nope. I just go on my instincts. I don't become a fanboy, but I follow my instincts. And I know from personal experience, right, that they don't attack their own shills. That just doesn't happen, right? So that's really one good way of determining not whether they're on your side, as it were, right, but whether they have a position that's interesting within the game. Right? And Musk undoubtedly has an interesting position in the game, and he is undoubtedly pushing back against narrative control. Do you think that the British state want the grooming gang issue discussed on the world stage, embarrassing the British government and the British establishment the way it has been? Do you think that's what they want? Do you think that's part of the game? No. Now, he may, of course, be in another faction, but regardless, that serves our purpose. So I'll take the wins where they come, and I'll take them, whenever they happen. And also, is that somebody needs to give Starmer it straight, and he's doing it. So I enjoy those wins when they happen. Conscious observer. Write everything like a judge is going to read it. Another prescient warning. This is a brilliant piece of advice, right? And this is, again, I learned from going to court, right? Going to court 20 or 30 times, maybe more, right? Fighting civil cases, arguing in front of a judge, having my statements read out. And at first, because I didn't have the self-control that I do now, is that I became too emotional. I became outraged in my challenges with the state. And I became embarrassed when you'd hear the judge reading it out. It's like, oh, God. Right? And from that moment on, I realized that every interaction that you have, to some degree, imagine if a judge was reading it out in a court. And immediately you begin to control the frame. And it's absolutely a brilliant piece of advice. That. Thanks for chipping in, Conscious Observer, for that. Rib Baller or Riballer. I don't know who half of these people are. If you know me, right, let me know who you are in the chat rather than calling you by the handle. That's if you don't want to remain anonymous. Riballer, just think of how previous generations spoke and thought. It doesn't compare to now. East and West has swapped its role on suppression. This is exactly right. Is that the EU is the EU SSR. I think Gorbachev said it. He said, the Soviet Union collapsed and just moved into Europe. And this is what we're seeing, is that, this collection of unelected technocrats and bureaucrats who are running the EU. None of them have been voted into power, in charge of enormous amounts of money, and are just going from one totalitarian measure to another. But as we saw in the lives of others, again, watch that film. I'm not going to tell you the end, or maybe I've already told you the end, or maybe you know the end because the wall came down, didn't it? But in the lives of others, you can see, how they do it and what they do and the lengths that they go to. So Germany has still got that going on because they had, the whole scene with the National Socialists. Then from the National Socialists, they went to the Communists, right? So they've been under some form of authoritarian rule for a long time. And as a result, the Germans are generally very compliant to authority. They don't question it. And they kind of I remember during COVID, is that countries who had former dictators, Portugal, Spain, Germany, had some of the highest uptake of the vaccine because they had been conditioned by previous authoritarian governments to accept what the state tells them is truth without any question. Trevor Labonte. Hey, Trevor. Thanks for joining in, mate. Wonder what crime Starmer has committed to be handed this role as PM. Undoubtedly, this guy has got more skeletons in his closet than a cemetery. And that's why he's prepared to do whatever he does. This guy's a dangerous guy. People say he sounds weak and everything. This guy will put you in prison if you're innocent. He'll put you in for life. He doesn't give a fuck, man. He is hell-bent on executing his legacy. Critical thinking is only encouraged in upper-class circles. Even those guys are pretty, controlled. Let's look at the way the British establishment have rolled out with this Ukraine nonsense. Right? Is that they're just all gung-ho for it, despite it being just a crazy risk for the treasure and life of the country. What stream, man? They just tried to collapse the narrative right there. Yeah. Okay. So Steve Laws, yeah, very interesting. Like Steve Laws, what is interesting about Steve Laws, I've noticed, is that he just keeps getting better and better with the way he presents himself in public. Because in that Andrew Gold podcast, which I thought was a very important podcast, is there was some part of his argument, because, they're going into the minutiae, aren't they, of like, how are you going to do it? How is remigration going to work, right? And it's like, well, I'm not the politician. I'm just an activist, right? I'm just pushing back. I haven't got a think tank with millions of pounds investment to come up with these policy solutions. That's what we pay the politicians to do. So there was some areas where his argument was a little weak, no fault of Steve's, right? But and that's what Andrew Gold was trying to expose. He was trying to unpick his position. And I think I seen him on the Jolly Heretic recently, and he was much better. So he'd gone away, he'd done some further research, he had articulated his views better. I thought it was good. I'm not sure who Paul Miller is, though. Sorry. Keep on gabbing for a free world. Yeah. Musk tweeted, Merav Magaluf, Musk tweeted something last night about most leaders being actors with scripts and all theatre, becoming obvious that are heads of government and middle management for international financial banksters, of course. Yeah, and they have been for a long time, is that you don't get into office unless you've been selected first. And you've either been selected for your perversion, your corruption, or your ability to be bribed or threatened. The pushback is immense. They don't care. They know they have to punch this technocratic lockdown through. Otherwise, they never will. Absolutely. The UK needs to be disbanded. Ulster is Irish. UK is a supranational union. Wait until the military's on the streets. Trump admin is doing their best to provoke insurrection act with ICE. Silky music. This track hit home after 9/11. Goose stepping towards a fascist ideology. Obedience is a self-imposed prison. Thanks, Trevor. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a little bit long. I'm sorry if it was too long. Yeah. So again, I'm just getting back into the swing of things, trying to find out what the shape is, what the format is, and sometimes I have to make a decision and just commit to what it is that I'm doing and hope it works, right? And the more I do, it's like the fact that it's only once a week is difficult because you only get to do it once a week. But then you can prepare more content and stuff. I don't know. You tell me. You tell me. Missed the first 30 minutes of the chat, so I don't know if it was mentioned, but what are your thoughts on Trump placing Blair on the Gaza border peace? I don't know. I don't know. I haven't really read that, but there's always something else going on rather than what it looks like on the surface. Obviously, Blair is one of the worst things to happen to Britain, England, since Thatcher at least, right? But maybe even more than that, right? Is that he absolutely took a wrecking ball to the culture and traditions and the constitution, the laws, the history of Britain, and we're feeling the consequences of it now, 30 years later. And he's maintained his grip. The New Labour project has still been running, even despite New Labour not being in. That Tory government that followed New Labour, the David Cameron government, that was just New Labour. They weren't real Tories. Not that real Tories are any good, but they were left-wing Tories. They were the heirs to Blair. That's literally what Cameron was called. So we've had 30 years of the New Labour project, and we're seeing the fruits of that project, which is the destruction of our homeland. Don't get me going about smoking bans in pubs. Guys, remember that. Remember what pubs used to be like, a thick wall of smoke. And then the moment you stop smoking, you could smell all the old piss heads. Yeah. Okay, I think that's the end. So thanks. I think that's the end. Otherwise, I don't know whether the chat has blown down, but thanks everyone for watching. I appreciate it. I appreciate your support and staying with me for 2 hours there. I was a little bit worn out by the end, but thanks for joining me. I'm back this time next Sunday for another Drift and Drop. I'll leave you with the last tune. See you next week.
Zombie, oh zombie.
Zombie, oh zombie.
Zombie, oh zombie.
Zombie, oh zombie.
Zombie not go unless you tell him to go.
Zombie.
Zombie not go stop unless you tell him to stop.
Zombie.
Zombie not go turn unless you tell him to turn.
Zombie.
Zombie not go think unless you tell him to think.
Zombie.
Zombie, oh zombie.
Zombie, oh zombie.
Zombie, oh zombie.
Zombie, oh zombie.
Zombie not go unless you tell him to go.
Zombie.
Zombie not go stop unless you tell him to stop.
Zombie.
Zombie not go turn unless you tell him to turn.
Zombie.
Zombie not go think unless you tell him to think.
Zombie.
Zombie, oh zombie.
Zombie, oh zombie.
Zombie, oh zombie.
Zombie, oh zombie.
Tell him to go straight. Na joro jara joro. No break, no jam, no sense. Na joro jara joro. Tell him to go kill. Na joro jara joro. No break, no jam, no sense. Na joro jara joro. Tell him to go quench. Na joro jara joro. No break, no jam, no sense. Na joro jara joro. Go and kill.
Joro jara joro.
Go and die.
Joro jara joro.
Go and quench.
Joro jara
Put
joro.
up all the verse.
Joro jara joro.
Go and quench.
Joro jara joro.
Go and kill.
Joro jara joro.
Go and die.
Joro jara
Put
joro.
up all the verse.
Joro jara joro.
Go and die.
Joro jara joro.
Go and quench.
Joro jara joro.
Go and kill.
Joro jara
Put up all the verse.
Joro jara joro.
Joro jara joro. Zombie when I one way. Joro jara joro. Zombie when I one way. Joro jara joro. Zombie when I one way. Joro jara joro. Whoa. Attention, quick march, slow march, left turn, right turn, back turn, double up, salute, open your hat, stand at ease, fall in, fall out, fall down, dead ready. Attention, quick march, slow march, left turn, right turn, back turn, double up, salute, open your hat, stand at ease, fall in, fall out, halt! Order! Attention, quick march, slow march, left turn, right turn, back turn, double up, salute, open your hands, stand at ease, fall in, fall out, fall down, get ready. Attention, quick march, slow march, left turn, right turn, back turn, double up, salute, open your hands, stand at ease, fall in, fall out, fall down, get ready, hot! Order! One more time, everybody. Attention, quick march, slow march, left turn, right turn, back turn, double up, salute, open your hands, stand at ease, fall in, fall out, fall down, get ready. Attention, quick march, slow march, left turn, right turn, back turn, double up, salute, open your hands, stand at ease, fall in, fall out, fall down, get ready. Ha!